what's coming is going to be absolutely amazing. And then when you look at it through defending critical infrastructure, or maybe through a military lens, it really will be a force multiplier. You're coming to
Hmm.
us live from the island of Guam, a U.S. territory in the heart of the Indo-Pacific area. You're a hop, skip, and a jump away from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, mainland China, the Philippines, etc. You're really kind of at the forefront of where this technology is going to be used. You're not just a U.S. territory. I would actually posit that in this ongoing low intensity cyber war, you're a frontline outpost. So I would not be surprised if Guam is at the forefront of a lot of these cutting edge technologies and methodologies, simply given your geographic location to known adversaries and bad actors.
Up a day, it's your innovation coach, Rob Jackson, and welcome to another edition of the Innovate Guam podcast, the podcast where we explore all things innovation, technology, and improvement on the island of Guam. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Substack. My podcasts drop at the beginning of each week. Also, be sure to check out my Innovate column in the Pacific Daily News every first and third Friday of the month. All right, I'm really excited to have this conversation today with our guest today. Our guest today is a seasoned cybersecurity expert with over 20 years of experience protecting networks, systems, and critical infrastructure across military, government, and private sectors. Our guest has currently serves as a senior cybersecurity advisor and program manager at CACI International, providing advanced cybersecurity support to federal clients, including the United States Navy and the Department of Defense. His expertise spans cyber risk management, security architecture, incident response, and building resilient cyber defense programs aligned with mission critical operations. He is a CISSP and um, project management professional. He holds a master's degree in information assurance. He has been at the forefront of discussions on AI integration with cybersecurity, supply chain cyber threats, and advanced persistence threats in the Indo-Pacific region. His insights are particularly timely as we explore the unique cyber threats facing Guam and the broader Pacific region. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you Mr. Dan Van Wagenen. Dan, how are you doing? Half a day and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Robert, thanks for having me, and good morning, although good evening here.
Well, we're excited to have you. We have a tradition here. We start off with some icebreaker questions, kind of see where your head is at in terms of innovation. So we'll start off. What's your definition of innovation and what does innovation mean to you?
Thanks, Robert. Innovation to me very simply means being able to solve big problems. The old adage that necessity is the modern, I'm sorry, the mother of all invention is very much true, especially when you're talking applied cybersecurity techniques or technologies, as well as in critical infrastructure. Because when you think about it, while we have matured cybersecurity frameworks and practices for IT security, information technology security, in the world of operational technologies or OT security, it's still very much the Wild West. And that doesn't even take into account this nexus, if you will, where OT and IT are coming together. And then when you throw on the generative AI component, things get very interesting very quick. So there's not a day that goes by that I don't see some form of innovation. How are we using artificial intelligence to better aid the cyber defender, for example? And I think it's probably the most exciting time I can remember in my career, going back to the early 2000s to be in the field.
Absolutely. So, what is your favorite cybersecurity tool, technique, framework, or piece of technology?
No loaded question there whatsoever. I think in terms of tools, I kind of run the gamut. I don't want to give one particular endorsement. I would say, pretty much anything that's open source is a great starting point for me. I grew up using the old Backtrack suite, which is now Kali Linux, for example.
Mhm.
But whether, you're just deploying a simple Nmap instance on your home network, whether you're putting together an Elastic Stack, home monitoring system, I'm very much a proponent of free and open source software. Not to say that, paid applications don't have their place. We've all at certain times subscribed to either antivirus or other tool sets. But I
Yes.
really believe that an individual has to master their own tools if they want to be in cybersecurity or even just simply protect their own digital infrastructure. As far as frameworks go, I actually have not seen too many that I get excited about. I think SOC 2 was probably the most recent one that's come online where I really think it meets the mark. Unfortunately, a lot of the frameworks of the past, I feel, especially, if you look at the NIST SP 800 series, you know, they were
Yes.
originally designed to be tailored to an organization. And unfortunately, most organizations, because they lack cyber expertise, have tried to take them carte blanche and apply them. And that doesn't really work very well. So, again, I would say as far as frameworks go, SOC 2 is probably the gold standard in my book. And as far as technologies itself, I am very excited about this convergence between generative AI or agentic AI and cybersecurity and cyber operations. Hitherto, having been an old military man, the cyber domain was the only domain of warfare where the attacker had the advantage over the defender. The attacker only had to be right that one time to get access to a network, to be able to infiltrate, to be able to do privilege escalation, pivot through and compromise data and systems. With the advent of generative AI, and in particular agentic AI, I envision a world in the not too very distant future where you will have defensive cyber or computer network defense agents that will be augmenting the cyber defender. So what would that look like? Think about a typical breach where a bad guy was able to get in. Well, they may not get very far with the use of AI augmenting the human. Notice I don't say replace the human. I do believe that human
Mm.
loop will always be critical because somebody who's a living, breathing human being has to make certain calls, certain decisions. But for the first time, you could see swarms of DCO bots that are inhibiting an attacker, potentially throwing up junk infrastructure, basically stopping them from really being able to exploit whatever got them in the first place, or better yet, keeping them on the other side of the border gateway router, keeping them on the other side of the DMZ. The future is very exciting for me, and that's actually one of the things that my current company, Minerva Cyber Technologies, and I are working on. I expect to see those bots coming to market really within the next 6 months. So we're going to see over the next couple of years a paradigm shift where finally the defender can catch up and actually be able to stop defenders cold.
That's outstanding, and the future that you paint with that AI and the AI bots out there really gives a capability that we really uh, haven't had up until now. Innovation leaders, it's your innovation coach, Rob Jackson here. Are you ready to elevate your vehicle fleet operations? Fleet Solutions is an AI-enabled fleet management system. Fleet Solutions provides real-time video, smart analytics, and total efficiency. Keep your people safe and keep your business moving forward faster than ever before. Fleet Solutions, arriving tomorrow, today. Visit thefleetsolutions.net or call 671-988-9748 to schedule your personalized demo and revolutionize your fleet operations today. Are there already some AI bots on the market that are actively being used, or are we still waiting for that first wave of bots to kind of drop on the market within the next few months?
I am aware of some products that are out there that say they do the fully autonomous cyber defense. In practice, though, from what I've seen, what we're really picking apart are, like ChatGPT style chatbots that are guiding a defender on how to respond or what to do to harden a network. I don't think we're there yet in terms of true agentic AI that can act autonomously from the human. There may be some products out there I'm just simply not aware of, but I would say by and large, we're still flirting with this idea of how do you marry AI into the cyber ecosystem. Keep in mind, there's risks that do come with that. Any agentic AI, any generative AI, it runs on data. That's its lifeblood. So there is going to be risk of data getting out into the wild or potentially data leakage. So I know a lot of security practitioners, and I was at I believe it was a Forbes Technology Council meeting not too long ago where a lot of these concerns were brought up.
Hmm.
Everybody sees the potential of AI, but how do we safely bring it into the cyber ecosystem where we don't have to worry about unintended consequences? I just know
Yes.
what my lab guys and I are working on is very promising. A vision, essentially an autonomous agentic AI swarm that can adapt. It can learn in real time during an attempted attack or a breach. Doing containment, doing incident response. I see that very much on the horizon, and we're not talking years. We're talking months, potentially even weeks, to be able to prototype this, to put it into production, to test it in real world scenarios. And that's going to change everything in the cyber world. That's going to change how we do playbooks. That's going to change, how we do governance and risk management.
Mm.
And again, even though I've been doing this for quite some time, I do work with a lot of folks I would define as kind of curmudgeon or set in their ways. They're very slow to appreciate, I think, the potential of AI. I embrace it wholeheartedly because I'm already seeing how it's working for the cyber defender. And that could be just a simple pre-trained chatbot that can navigate, let's just say, a tier one cyber defender through what could be an incident response drill. The coming, what's coming is going to be absolutely amazing. And then when you look at it through defending critical infrastructure, or maybe through a military lens, it really will be a force multiplier. You're coming to
Hmm.
us live from the island of Guam, a U.S. territory in the heart of the Indo-Pacific area. You're a hop, skip, and a jump away from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, mainland China, the Philippines, etc. You're really kind of at the forefront of where this technology is going to be used. You're not just a U.S. territory. I would actually posit that in this ongoing low intensity cyber war, you're a frontline outpost. So I would not be surprised if Guam is at the forefront of a lot of these cutting edge technologies and methodologies, simply given your geographic location to known adversaries and bad actors.
That's a great perspective on it. Guam is the front line of this cyber war, if you will, that's
Mhm.
already underway. And this is a great uh, place or opportunity for us to kind of build and experiment with new technologies because we are front line of that. So, what other threat, cyber threats, or the general cyber landscape do you see here in Guam and throughout the Indo-Pacific?
Oh God, how much time you got? The stakes to me are high. Again, having been a military cyber professional a good chunk of my career, and the last several years I've been on the industry side since I've retired. Uh, the sheer weight and magnitude of cyber operations in the Indo-Pacific is absolutely mind-boggling. Where you're at alone, you have this nexus between critical infrastructure defense, U.S. military assets. You're a major juncture with undersea cables and a major launching point for just U.S. regional deterrence posture. I would be hard pressed to say there's anywhere else in the U.S. sphere of influence that probably rivals what Guam brings to the table there. And that would include states like Alaska and Hawaii or Wake Island, those other locations. As far as just the strategic cyber terrain, if you will, you're the home of massive amounts of U.S. military force structure. I believe it's Anderson Air Force Base. You got
Yes,
Naval Base there. You have these major power
and now
projections.
Marine Corps.
Yep,
base. Yep.
Marine Corps, you got also, don't forget too, the Army passes through quite a bit. You got the Talisman Saber exercises every year. They're
Correct.
huge, bringing a lot of the reserve components. So you're in the heart of it, my friend. I don't think there's any other way really to put it. And you're also key to a lot of command and control for the United States, for the Western allies in terms of Taiwan contingency plans. Everybody is
Yes.
watching what China, their saber rattling is doing to the island nation of Taiwan. Taiwan, of course, not only being a key Western ally, but also, the largest semiconductor manufacturer and exporter in the world. There's economic as well as military considerations to take into account there, and Guam is right there.
Yes.
Fortunately, that also makes Guam a major target for our adversaries, predominantly the big four, Russia, Iran, North Korea, but most importantly, mainland or communist China.
Yeah.
China has not been, I think, very bashful under Xi Jinping about their ambitions for Taiwan. They are making a claim to territorial sovereignty that I think is not necessarily historically accurate, but that may not stop them from actually launching some sort of amphibious airborne invasion in 2027. And this is all publicly available information. I do believe
Yes.
that if a war were to break out or we were to have another hotspot between China and Taiwan, that war will begin in cyberspace, much like what we saw with the Russian-Ukraine conflict that's ongoing. It will probably start in cyberspace. It will probably end in cyberspace, and Guam will certainly be in the thick of it.
Can you talk a little bit about that lessons learned from the um, Ukraine war and how it started in space?
Sure. Just to kind of start at the beginning, I mean, tensions between Russia and Ukraine are nothing new. This has been going on since the breakup of the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War. And with the most recent conflict, you know, you could make the argument Russia really prepared the battlefield with cyber effects. What do I mean by that? Well, prior to the Russian tanks and infantry moving across the border, there were sustained cyber attacks on critical infrastructure across Ukraine, as well as a lot of private sector industries such as fintech, and a lot of the banks were shut down on the eve of the Russian invasion. Um, I would for I don't I want to be kind of careful here. I am not a crystal ball, but I would say there will be a lot of parallels to a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. In order to ensure minimum casualties and successful kinetic operations with airborne and naval amphibious landings, they will have to try to make that nation blind. And what do I mean by that? They're going to have to launch cyber effects. They're going to have to do cyber preparation of the battlefield, where whether it's a massive DDoS attack, the likes of which we've ever seen, or logic bombs that are deployed across their critical infrastructure, they're going to have to shoot down their comms, because if you can't communicate, you can't shoot and move. And much like Taiwan, I see Guam in the current geopolitical operating environment. Your connected connectivity is your lifeline, right? It's also your
Yes.
biggest cyber vulnerability because you are an island. At the end of the day, you can only fall back or maneuver so far before you hit this thing called water, and it's very hard to do that if you can't swim or don't have ships. So I see that, you ask about the parallels between the current Russian-Ukraine war. I do see a lot of those lessons learned carrying over to a potential China-Taiwan conflict.
That's good information. So many of our listeners might not be familiar with China's Salt Typhoon and
Mhm.
Volt Typhoon cyber operations. Can you explain both of them to us? What are they? What they are? What kind of targets do they focus on? And what kind of been their history in the um, near past?
Sure thing. So I'll start with the beginning of the terminology typhoon, because if you're not a cybersecurity professional, if you don't live, breathe, and eat this stuff the way I do or you do, you hear typhoon and it's like you're turning on the weather channel wondering if there's something coming your way. When you hear us talk about the Chinese typhoon actors, what we're talking about are known state-sponsored cyber actors coming out of China. And these can be dedicated Chinese military units. These can be dedicated government cyber actors. The Typhoon nomenclature is used to identify them as Chinese. Now, there's other nomenclature like Bear for, Russia, for example, which makes sense given their history. This is just a way for cyber professionals to be able to track what bad guys are doing what. And it's actually very fascinating in this world of cyber threat
It's like a
intelligence.
whole language where you cyber defenders.
It very much is. And for us, it makes sense. For people outside the community, it may be kind of confusing. But from a cyber threat intelligence perspective, to be able to even ascertain a digital footprint that can be attributed to an entity, that is very hard to do. So the fact that we have as much information about the Typhoon actors, you mentioned Salt and Volt, but there's others like Silk. It's absolutely crazy to me because you have to be able to put digital fingerprints to them. You have to be able to attribute certain tactics, techniques, and procedures or TTPs to them. And it is not an easy science. I would actually bill it as more of an art. But to start at the beginning, if you go back to the Chinese, everyday war theory that originated around 2000, this is a natural evolution of that. The Chinese may not take us on directly in a kinetic war, us being the United States or NATO or the United Nations allies, but they will certainly infiltrate. They will certainly use technology against us. They will certainly, hack us, to use a more common phrase. And starting about 5 years ago, you had a number of organizations, both government and private sector, your Microsoft, your CISAs, your NSAs of the world, begin to attribute Typhoon activity to Chinese state-sponsored APTs or advanced persistent threats. And again, this is just, we were able to identify enough of a digital footprint to say, okay, this is clearly Chinese. We know it's a Typhoon, and we're going to assign an additional nomenclature to it, Volt Typhoon, which is geared towards critical infrastructure. This is, your roads, your gas and electric, your rail, your air systems, those types of things. These actors by and large focus on a stealthy long-term access for pre-positioning. You can think of it almost as, the kinetic equivalent of, they're scouting, they're doing reconnaissance. Their goal is not to immediately cause disruption. And that's what makes the Chinese, as compared to like the Russian bear actors, I think a little bit harder to track and a little bit more scary. When the Russians, your crazy bear actors go in to a digital environment, I've heard it equated that they're really a bull in a china shop. They're not exactly concerned about, people collecting cyber threat intelligence on them or the cyber defender finding artifacts that they were there. They almost don't seem to care. The Chinese can get in and out, and you will never know that they were there. They are very, very good. I would say probably out of the big four, they probably surpass the Russians. They by and large train the North Korean actors, and North Korea typically tries to mask their activities as Chinese Typhoon actors, although that doesn't always work out for them. And the Iranians are kind of in a different class by their own some. But the Chinese are probably by far the most sophisticated. One of the things they are most known for is living off the land, or LOTL. These are
Yes.
techniques where they're embedded in the infrastructure. They evade detection very, very well. The processes, the low-level processes are very hard to identify. And the oldest amongst them, I believe, is Volt Typhoon. That has been active at least since about early to mid 2021. I would actually posit that they were probably online as early as 2018, 2019. It was just by 2021 we were able to triangulate the digital footprints and artifacts to say, okay, this is clearly a unique element.
Yeah.
So what is it the Typhoon actors are trying to do? It's a widely held belief in the cyber ecosystem and community that they are really trying to establish critical infrastructure holds across Guam and even US bases in the continental United States. And this is more of a contingency. They want to be in there to shut down communications, to be able to shut down critical services. in the event of a conflict over Taiwan. So you can think of it almost as a tripwire. They operate very quietly for intelligence collection, shaping of the battlefield or cyber preparation of the battlefield. And I think and I kind of feel I'm in the minority on this one. Even though the Chinese are very good, they're very stealthy, they can get in and out without being noticed. In this respect, I actually think that they're trying to get our attention to signal that, hey, we're here, and if you try anything, we will make your life a living hell in the cyber domain. That's just Dan's opinion.
Mm,
But
mm.
you look at what they've been doing over the last at least 5 years. They started infiltrating quietly U.S. critical infrastructure in Guam let's just say early 2021. They started really showing up on the radar beginning in 2022, where DoD contractors, ISPs in Guam started raising the alarm. I know Microsoft publicly made their giant disclosure. I believe that was spring of 2023, saying, hey,
23, yeah.
yep, we've identified both Typhoon. Here's the campaign. Here's what they're targeting. And ever since then, it's really just been a spiral effect. That's where the other Typhoons, SALT and Silk, have been identified. CISA, the Critical Infrastructure and Security Agency, as well as the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command elements within the military, have done some real surveying of the island of Guam. And the story kind of goes from bad to worse, right? The FBI is involved now. There's Chinese digital assets embedded across water, power, communication networks. It's not a very good place to be. And I hate to sound doom and gloom on it, but as a cyber professional, especially somebody who was U.S. military, who supported civilian authorities and private sector entities through the Guard, I really feel like we were asleep at the switch on this one. We really
Mm.
should have been more vigilant, and now we're having that holy crap moment where now we have to get a known adversary out of our infrastructure and networks. That's very hard to do.
So let me jump in here. Um, why doesn't this get more press? Like, for example, one of the typhoons was like one of the largest um, penetrations uh, in history. The one that they went in the back door of the telecoms, and I'm told that they got access to like 50 plus um, telephones of key officials in the DC area. And then later on, they were able to get into communication systems of the National Guard. And
Mhm.
I'm also told that they were able, well, they went and they were actually feeling out and exploring Guam right after the typhoon. Why doesn't this get more like press and talking about?
I'm not entirely sure it's not getting the press. I think what's being disclosed about the Typhoon attacks is being very limited. And obviously, there's operational concerns about that. We don't want to tip off the Chinese that we know about certain TTPs, or we know about certain presence that have been dug in certain sectors. That part I get. What I would like to see, and I know Sean Planky, the nominee for director of CISA, just had his hearing with the Senate. I'm hoping he's confirmed, because we really do need people who understand the problem to be able to come in and really create a get well plan. The FBI can only do so much being law enforcement. Um, U.S. Cyber Command, part of the U.S. military, can only do so much, given that a lot of the compromises have occurred across private sector entities. The military does not have authority to go in and clean those up. But I haven't really seen, and I agree with you here, I haven't really seen a concerted effort to lead a response. It's
Yeah,
almost like,
so sorry to cut you off. That's kind of where I'm going with it. And as a military, retired military officer, it concerns me that we as a nation have a response protocol and plan if we're attacked nuclear. There's a nuclear
mm,
attack. If there's a conventional attack, there's a response plan uh, in place. But it seems like when there's attacks in cyberspace, there really isn't a protocol or plan. It's kind of like we're sitting there, with the deer in the headlights look,
Mm,
and we're trying to figure out what do we do and what should be our response when a foreign entity that we can trace back to state sponsored, might
mm.
even be a Chinese PLA unit or whatever, has done something to us like that. We don't even really have a response protocol in place.
I agree with you. And believe me, I think you and I are brothers in a way because I have tried to sound the alarm on this for many, many years. Going back to when I was on active duty at U.S. Cyber Command, it was funny, being a guardsman on Title 10 orders with the active duty folks, they saw their mission as defending U.S. government assets, the DoDIN, the military communications network. And it stopped there when, like you said, you had known Russian, Chinese, these military assets that were operating on U.S. soil, compromising our critical infrastructure. I think one of the problems we're running into is we have never actually defined what an act of cyber war is and it isn't. If China were to send over a fleet and make an amphibious landing in San Francisco, everybody would agree that is an act of war. Well, if China's stealing our IP, like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter to create their own, or they're infiltrating our critical infrastructure, or they're stealing state secrets, yeah, they may not physically be here, but they're still accomplishing the same kinetic uh, style objectives. Does that not qualify as an act of war? And you brought up the nuclear example. Well, during the Cold War, when it was the communist nations against the free West, we had détente. They had nukes, we had nukes.
Right,
Everybody understood mutually assured destruction. Mad.
right.
It's my personal opinion that we are living in an age of what I'm calling mutually assured access, MAA. And
Mm,
until the members of Congress, till the White House, till military members, cabinet appointees really get on the same page and have this, let's just call it a cyber council of Nicaea to deconflict these different cyber missions and these authorities, I agree with you. It's like, something out of the Ghostbusters, right? Who you're going to call?
right.
We don't really have
Yeah.
an element to step in to say, China stop or work with private industry to get the Chinese out of their network. And I do feel for you and the people of Guam because you're on the front lines of this, right? Um, they're in your infrastructure. Uh, they have mastered the art of things like stealing credentials and getting domain access. They have compromised a lot of the main cybersecurity vendors and providers, who all of whom I greatly respect. But it's very hard to stay on top of everything when you have an entire nation state dedicated to compromising your appliances. They're very good at log evasions, anti-forensics. Um, I really feel that there's a possibility that Guam is being used as a test case. How far can the
Mm,
Chinese push before the
mm,
Americans push back? And we're kind of in a transition as Americans because, we have a new president that's been seated. We have a new Congress that's been seated. A lot of the cyber principles are still awaiting confirmation, the confirmation process with the U.S. Senate. Um, I know I've highlighted a lot of problems, but I think as a solution, getting the right people into place to be able to help Sean Planky at CISA as director there. You have Sean Cranecross as the national cyber director, who's really looking to flex muscle with that office. You have Lori Buckhout over at the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber Policy Office. I think we are getting a lot of the right people in. They just haven't had enough time to get settled to make change. And the $1 million question, or even the $1 billion question, is can they facilitate change before China or any other nation state actor makes a move?
yeah. So follow me here.
Hmm.
Like one of the incursions, cyber incursions that we had from Iran after the October 7th um, Hamas attack uh, on Israel, there was an incursion from Iran to like a utility, I think a water utility company outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right?
Mhm.
My understanding is there's also, when we had Typhoon Mawar, there were incursions into GPA, right? So when those incursions happen and they have access and got into those systems, it's like you'll hear something about it, about the concerns, but do we know that it's been cleaned up? Have we repelled them completely? What's the cleanup after they get? We have a cyber incursion into like one of our utilities. What's the cleanup effort? Let alone the response that yes, we caught you doing this, and this is now the penalty or price you're going to pay for doing it. But also, here's what we did to clean up and repel and get your access away from our systems.
Uh, Again, no loaded question here. Everything you brought up, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think there's things we can do now, which I'm aware that like the NSA's collaboration, Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, Triple C, is engaging the government of the island of Guam, a lot of the private industries there. I know Indo-Pacific and U.S. Cyber Command have dispatched elements for, your hunt forward missions, all of which is great, but I think it's going to have to be a team sport. I think diplomatically, America's going to have to bring
DPA is not going to be able to clean it up on by themselves,
correct.
right? Yeah,
Well,
they're going to need a team of some pretty high powered individuals to kind of come in and help make that happen.
they are. And again, I'm saying this with a lack of visibility into Guam's local infrastructure. I haven't actually seen the logs. I haven't seen the PCAP, but I've seen enough public information to know that the situation's really bad. And I think a really good start would be civil military cyber coordination. I think it's fairly underdeveloped in the United States. I think we're getting more mature, but we have a long way to go. Um, Having the guard assets that are available at Guam work with the active duty. I know you have a pretty active like Coast Guard auxiliary and Civil Air Patrol
Yeah,
element that can be augmented with cybersecurity professionals. I've been pushing lawmakers on Capitol Hill to really look at those as an option. But I really think you need to have, at the end of the day, um, a cyber Guam or a Guam cyber defense initiative. That's going to involve DoD, that's going to involve DHS, it's going to involve a lot of private sector collaboration. Because really, without those three elements working together in tandem and somebody actually being identified as being on first, I don't see the situation getting any better. You need to have empowered local CERT capabilities. You referenced the university systems there. I have to imagine they have cyber and critical infrastructure security or engineering programs that could be utilized. That also helps with things like workforce and pipeline development, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But also, I think one of the areas I would like to see the most being here in lovely DC on the exact opposite side of the world from Guam is just enhanced incident reporting and threat sharing. As a member of private
yeah,
industry, I know what I read in like NextGov or Wired. Um, I'm not seeing a whole lot come out officially with here's what we're seeing, here's what you can do from the US government or even a lot of the NGO and nonprofit bodies. It's still very much a decentralized and disparate effort.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. Team sport.
Mhm.
Um, it's got to be collaboration and putting together the mechanisms or forms to enable that collaboration. That makes sense to me. So let's talk about the difference between state-sponsored actors and more criminal
Mhm.
elements. Like the example that I throw out there is back in 2021, the ransomware incident with the Colonial pipeline that supplies most of the gas to half the states on the East Coast. That was taken over. shut down, and eventually they ended up paying like $4.4 million in Bitcoin to the hackers. I think they were called the dark side or something like
Mhm.
that, in order to get access back to the pipeline. And it had an impact on, fuel shortages and stuff on the east coast of the U.S., and all of that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other ones that are out there and threats from criminal hackers?
Sure thing. So I'll start with, you referenced Colonial Pipeline. I think really that should have been the wake-up call for the United States in particular to take cyber and critical infrastructure security seriously. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. It was almost like as soon as, the cyber responders, folks like Dragos who got involved, came in and they were able to ascertain that the hackers actually got into the billing system. They didn't really seem to get into the OT, at least based off publicly available information. There was kind of this collective sigh of relief, and then everybody just moved on with their lives instead of somebody taking a hard look saying, this never should have happened. We really need to look at a national cyber posture. Anybody who has one of these things or a smartwatch, or, now you got the Ray-Ban smart glasses, or any other connected device is a target. And we haven't had that discussion. And I was listening to a talk not long ago by a man I greatly respect, Mark Montgomery, who led the Cybersecurity Solarian Commission. And he was very adamant about a whole of government, whole of nation approach to cyber and critical infrastructure security, which I fully agree with. We have not had those conversations. So just to take a quick aside, but it's related. You would never leave your house and not lock your front door. Just like you would never, get out of your car to go to the grocery store without locking your car up on the way out.
Yeah.
The cyber domain seems to be the only domain of our lives where, we just throw open the doors. It's like, hey, we got all this data, come on in. And that ranges from, people who have the TikTok app on their phone to people who have become reliant on DeepSeek AI, generative AI, because it's cheaper than maybe OpenAI's ChatGPT model, for example. We're putting all this data out that is not only going to nation state actors like China, but it's also going to cyber criminals. Not a day goes by that you don't read about somebody, some company getting compromised. You cited ransomware. I mean, that's still a thing, but they're getting very good at using AI to say impersonate the voice and video image of his CEO
Yeah.
to tell the CFO to transfer $20 million to X account. With the advent of deep fakes and technologies like that, the world just got exponentially more scary. And I don't think we're having those discussions on how do we want to mitigate that, because criminals will always adapt. They're going to go where the money is, whether it's, Bitcoin or some other thing that's out there. I was reading this morning about, some of the online gaming community, the buying and selling of weapons and packages and DLC packs. That's damn near its own underground economy. We're going to see more of that because we have, again, all this data that's floating around about us. I mean, I could Google your name, somebody could Google my name, you could Google anybody's name, or even now run it through AI and get a pretty decent profile of who that person is, where they live or where they've been, places they potentially frequent. And if you have enough data points, I mean, you can actually extrapolate further information using AI models, because, nobody reads that, end user licensing agreement. They just click accept. And whether you're using, something more mainstream like Claude, by Anthropic, or, you're using a lot of the Chinese models like Qwen or DeepSeek, we're giving up an awful lot of information that can be compromised by cyber
Mhm.
criminals. It used to be, you've
Mm.
probably seen the meme, or people listening or watching have probably seen the meme about, questions to ask your date on a first date, like what's their
Yeah,
mother's
yeah,
name, what's their pet's
yeah.
name, because so you can guess their password. We are so far beyond that now. It's frightening. That's why we're moving to things like, well, authenticator apps or pass keys, because, what we used to just bill as your basic cyber hygiene doesn't cut it anymore. So to answer your question about cyber criminals, they're going to proliferate. They are going to target you as an individual or the people watching this or me. It used to be people, I would hear people say, well, I don't really need to secure my tech because I'm just a consumer user. I don't have anything to hide. Yeah, you do. You have bank accounts, you have things that they want, things that they could potentially blackmail you with. They could sell on the dark web for a profit. Every man, woman, and child that has something like this is a target. And unfortunately,
Mm,
I think with wearables advancing and collecting more data and transmitting more data, we're only going to see the age of cybercrime proliferate because you have a
yeah.
lot of people that will do anything to make a buck. And the cyber criminals in Russia, Eastern Europe, India, Central Africa, they have gotten very, very good at separating you from your money.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's move forward to kind of one of the underlying themes of this podcast. We've talked a lot on this podcast with other guests about this vision of Guam being a tech and innovation hub for the 21st century. And a
Mhm.
way to get there is to build up the sustainment and logistics capability of Guam, supporting the military forces here. So turning Guam into this defense industrial sustainment hub, if you will.
Mhm.
If that were to come to fruition and under policies like the DoD regional sustainment framework and stuff, where you're pushing more industrial capability forward, whether that be for manufacturing or maintenance, repair, and overhaul, or smart manufacturing, micro uh, factories, even dual use kinds of factories and industrial entities. What do we need to do to bake in this cybersecurity piece? Because you've been talking about all of the vulnerabilities, and because of the location of Guam, we're like right on the front lines. What would you do? How would you do
Oh God, this is such a delicious question. So thank you for
it?
entertaining me. As you can tell, I get very passionate about cyber and critical infrastructure security. I think it's really going to be a giant call to action. And you'll appreciate this being a military veteran. I mean, you can almost think of Guam as a floating FOB, a forward operating base. So as I see it, there's really
We often talk about it in terms of an aircraft carrier. This is a
true,
floating
yeah, or
aircraft
an aircraft
carrier.
carrier,
Really.
a
There's a floating
stationary.
aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific. That's what Guam is.
Exactly. I was an Army guy, so I went with FOB,
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. I really think it's going to come down to three components. I think you're going to have Guam's government and industry itself that has to work together. They have to be on the same page. I think there's going to have to be that reach back to U.S. national policymakers and leaders, and then you're going to have the public involvement as part of the last component. And what I mean by that is, it again, cyber is a team sport. Cybersecurity, cyber defense, cyber resilience does not happen in a vacuum. So
Mm,
for Guam, government and industry need to work together. So whether it's investing in protection of assets, partnering with DoD, DHS, making sure that they bring out their red, blue teams or purple teams to help defend the local infrastructure. I think that's really going to be key, as well as training the next generation of Guam native cyber defenders. Again, we've talked about the academic
yes.
element here. Um, Given Guam's position to a lot of nefarious places on planet Earth in the evolving nature of technology, I would be utterly shocked if the educational institutions on Guam weren't pushing STEM hard, weren't pushing cybersecurity hard, because you guys are going to be the front line for whatever comes from the Far East. There's just no doubts about
And another contributor, like we talked about, underlying this is why Guam can be that innovation
it. Correct.
and technology and innovation hub, because it makes sense because of our geography that this is where you would put a cybersecurity center where the best and brightest minds came to learn, train, get up to speed, and develop technology and products to put in the play, and experiment with, because this is the front line.
Exactly. And also keep in mind too, you're not only potentially the front line in a cyber war or a kinetic war, you're also potentially the front line for an economic war. And what I mean by that
Yes,
is, given the natural resources in and around Guam, if for whatever reason Taiwan were to fall to China, well, the silicon man, you have to forgive me, I'm not a manufacturing guy, but being able to source the silicon, being able to bring it in, being able to put it through the fab process to make the wafers, make the dies, that could very reasonably shift to Guam, I think. Not that we want a scenario where Taiwan falls to communist China, knock on wood, but just with the president's objectives of reshoring industry, Guam would be a natural candidate for things like microprocessor manufacturing. I don't think
yes.
we're having those discussions. Again,
I
I
think
think.
the governor, sorry to interrupt you, but I think the governor led a delegation this calendar year to Taipei to
Hmm.
talk about opportunities to maybe bring some bit of chip manufacturing to Guam as an option. I thought that was a very interested and far-sighted kind of policy to kind of go after that, especially after the CHIPS Act, and you're trying to bring that
Exactly.
capability all the way back to the CONUS. It makes sense that step one might just be Guam because it's right there in theater, and then now building on that industrial capability forward. If you have the chip manufacturing there, some of the high tech weapon systems like unmanned vehicles, whether it be
Hmm.
aerial vehicles, surface, or underwater. You got the chips being made here. You can have the composites being made here. All of that kind of stuff in a forward deployed kind of industrial capability right here, ready for the fight.
Exactly. And just to kind of zoom in a little bit deeper, I mean, having Guam be a potential supply chain hub where, again, you have tensions between China and Taiwan, you have tensions between North and South Korea, the list goes on. Why aren't we having those discussions about maybe having Guam be the pilot for those types of manufacturing endeavors, maybe making things as mundane and simple as, OEM, ODM, laptop and computer parts. Again, Taiwan typically makes, through their white label companies, 60 to 70% of, the machines that are actually used by Dell or HP or those types of manufacturers. I think there's a lot of potential there as the president and the administration leadership looks to shift uh, manufacturing capability to the United States to have Guam be that stepping stone. So I would definitely encourage you and the leaders there to really look into that again as that cyber forward operating base in the Far East. I also think one of the things that could really help Guam is, a legislative solution to enable preemptive cyber defense for that U.S. territory and some of the
Yes,
adjacent territories, Wake Island, for example. We have plenty of military force structure still in Japan, still in South Korea, still in the Philippines. Guam could feasibly be that hub in a spoken wheel model. And I think that's something that would also be a boon to you, as well as potentially increase funding for infrastructure hardening, water, grid, telecoms.
yeah,
Um, if you're going to be the use case for China, it would make sense that we would pour resources into Guam to help protect you and counter that.
correct. Yeah, yeah, makes total sense. So let's talk a little bit about what you touched on, the whole idea of kind of workforce development.
Mm,
How do we do that? How could we be proactive and invest in workforce development of building those cyber professionals of the future right here on Guam? So native Guamanians, native Chamorros, uh, right here on Guam, getting that education and being those um, tech-focused cyber professionals that are needed for the
mm.
future.
I think again, it's going to take in your case, a whole of island approach. So in terms of just the broader cyber workforce development construct, I actually, I'm going to say something very controversial. I actually don't believe we have uh, a, a, a skilled worker problem. I think what we have is actually a hiring problem. And what do I mean by that? As a
Mhm.
small business owner myself, I deal a lot with HR requirements that say, okay, we need, a cybersecurity professional to do tier 3 hunt and incident response that has a bachelor's degree and 10 years of experience. Um, and I usually look at these requirements we get from our primes or customers, and I kind of laugh a little bit because what they're describing is somebody who doesn't exist. Up until really the last 5, 6, 7 years, you didn't have true cyber degrees in colleges and universities, for example.
Right,
Really, where I think we need to get it together is I don't care what papers or letters follow a person. I care about their skill sets. And unfortunately, when we're interviewing a candidate, we don't usually hone in on their skills. Like, okay, you sit them down at a computer, okay, you know, deploy a virtual machine instance or a Docker instance of X, or show me how you navigate a command line and build a secure shell tunnel to this IP address. We don't do that. We simply ask them a bunch of academic questions that
right.
a script kiddie in junior high could probably answer, and we're not looking at this through the correct lens. Again, that's just Dan's opinion. So, to shift it closer to home in Guam, I think really what we need is a true public-private partnership, given the strategic importance of where Guam is and what you're facing, where you have internship programs available to high school students, college students, where they can actually get that real honest to God OJT, where they're sitting at a terminal or they're looking at a dashboard and they can see packet capture, going across the wire in real time. And they can look at, what the dashboard's telling them it's seeing and how to read logs, how to read alerts. That's the real education to me. And I think to build on it, focusing on the certification process versus maybe a traditional degree is also a break with the norms that I think will pay dividends. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody fresh out of college with a bachelor's degree or even sometimes a master's degree who can't tell me the simplest things about applied cyber defense. It's almost heartbreaking. Whereas if you go through CompTIA, if you go through ISC Square, if you go through SANS, which to me is still the gold standard for information security training, I know right off the bat, you know what you're doing because the curriculum itself is not easy. The exams have gotten exponentially harder. It used to be, people could laugh at a CompTIA Security Plus CE certification. It has gotten very, very difficult. It's probably far more on par with, say, SANS GCIH, or I'm sorry, GSEC than it used to be. So those certifications mean something. And I think getting people either upskilled, as they come up through the education system, or in many cases, you have this pattern now of people reskilling into cyber. I just spoke to a
Yes.
lady today who's a registered nurse who wants to leave the medical profession to be in cybersecurity. How do we get them up to speed quickly, and then get them employed where they can actually do the job? I think between on-the-job training, internships, and certifications, that's the key, not necessarily this older or, what I would deem to be an archaic model of, well, you got to go to a college or a university, you got to get a degree, because usually by that point, those curriculums are so out of date, it's almost comical. We need to get butts in seats as quickly as possible so they can actually perform cyber defense activities.
Yeah, I was so glad to hear you say that because it seems like with all of the technology pursuits of the 21st century, the experts are saying the same thing. It's kind of moving away from our college bound model and more focus on skills. How do we upskill? How do we do stackable skills? How do we do certifications that actually people show that people have the skills to do what they need to do rather than just a piece of paper that says they've been educated, if you will.
Correct.
Even it seems like some of the big tech companies like Google and stuff have already started moving that direction because, even if you're graduating, what, like you said, with a degree, maybe even a master's degree from Stanford or someplace like that, now you come to Google and it's like, okay, you only have like 10 or 20% of what I need. Now sit down here and let me show you how we do things here. And there's this whole spin up process that
Correct.
is questioning the old school degree process.
Well, don't forget too, there's a lot of technology coming online that doesn't have an associated degree. It doesn't even have an associated industry certification. I mean, there is nothing that I'm aware of that, is like an agentic AI in the cyber domain certification. So, we really have to encourage people to be auto dictates and self learners and go getters because technology is changing so fundamentally so quickly. It used to be, whether you're talking a major platform or software or operating system, we talked in terms of years for development cycle
Years or decades.
or decades.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're
Yeah.
at a point where, like with agentic AI, we're talking like every 3 months, every six
Yes.
months, a
Yes.
new amazing LLM comes online that just blows away all preconceived notions of its application in the cyber domain. So, I love to talk to in particular, young people, but increasingly a lot of, mid-career people that are looking to change where, they're telling me about things are just researching on their own or they're building on their own. I think that's a very healthy sign of a digitally savvy society. And unfortunately, I think as a nation, as cyber and technology leaders, we don't foster that. We don't encourage that enough.
Yeah.
And I want those tinkerers. I want those people that are going to break things and try to figure out how it worked and then put it back together, or even make it better. We've really gotten away from that for this monolithic academic model that isn't serving us well in the cyber domain or even the critical infrastructure domains.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, this has been a great conversation. As a final thought, talk to me about what you would like the audience to know most about cybersecurity, the work that you do, and how they can stay informed or get involved.
I think now it's easier than ever to get a foot into the cyber world. And what I mean by that is there's resources galore. Just set aside the AI component for a second. SANS Institute, which is the proponent for a lot of the GX certifications, they have plenty of free resources. You're seeing a lot of government entities like CISA, NSA, they're being a little bit more forthcoming in things like configuration guides for even home devices, home networks. There's a plethora of resources out there that can help you get to where you want to be, depending on where you want to go in the cyber domain, working in critical infrastructure security, or even more just applied information technology disciplines, coding and programming to network architecture, cloud computing. There's so much freely available information. And I think that's amazing compared to when I first started doing this in like, 2004 or five, where, I mean, you had to find an old sage like Bruce Sneer, who was a first generation hacker, probably one of the only ones still active in
Hmm.
industry to really get big questions answered. Now it's at your fingertips in ways that were unimaginable then. So I would say, if that's what you want to do with your life, that's a great starting point. If you want to actually begin the transition into the industry, I jokingly refer to the CompTIA Security Plus certification as like the gateway drug, right? Because in terms of cyber knowledge, I know that if you can
Yeah.
pass Security Plus, you have a uniform and fundamental baseline of applied cybersecurity skills and knowledge. I can do a lot with that person. I can get them into an entry level cybersecurity position. I can see how they perform. I can mentor them to, Okay, maybe you have a passion for digital forensics. Why don't you specialize? Or maybe, you want to get more involved on the offensive side of things. Okay, you got, a long road to maybe OSCP, but, have you looked at, hunt forward, incident response, those types of disciplines? Um, Maybe you want to really weigh in on the governance debates. I hate to say it, but I think the RMF framework that we've been using since about 2011-ish is severely outdated for 2025.
Mm,
We need something that's faster, more adaptable. Um, we need people to come in and solve those big problems. So I would encourage anybody who's flirting with the idea of going into cyber to take that plunge, because there's probably never been a better time. And as far as Guam goes, I mean, look, you're not just a target. I mean, you're a test bed for China's cyber war playbook. It is
yes,
absolutely critical that you have a workforce that can be employed, uh, in some cases deployed, to counter cyber activities. So,
yes.
I know I gave you
Yeah.
kind of a long-winded answer there, but
That was great. And I think the big thing about it is, with some of those certifications that you were rattling off, um, those young people who want to go into the field and they get those certifications without a college degree, those people are starting at salaries at like 60 to $90,000 a year.
if not more.
Yeah, if not more. Yeah, depending on what your certification is and where you're working and what kind of experience you have, it's like you're starting there, So it's a great motivation for folks to kind of jump into that area.
Exactly, because look, anybody in cybersecurity, you will have job security for the foreseeable future. Unfortunately, as we become more connected, the world is getting more dangerous, and it's going to take this, in particular, the cyber defenders to keep us safe.
Yeah. Well, Dan, you did not disappoint. Thank you for your incredible insights. We really learned a lot. I could tell you're passionate about your profession. Um, Thank you for educating us about cybersecurity. I know I learned a lot, and I hope my audience learned a lot as well. Um, thank you so much. Um, I want to tell my audience, remember to follow me on all of the social media platforms, including Substack. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date on all future episodes. And don't forget to check out my Innovate column in the Pacific Daily News every first and third Friday of each month. Until next time, see you, and always remember, whether you're at home, at work, or at play, always innovate. Thank you.